Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ready, Set, Action. It's your weekly guide to navigating the world of business growth. I'm Christina Whitmer, a marketing veteran, and this is my co host, Deborah Horowitz, a talent leader. Each week, we bring you actionable tips and insights specifically designed for business owners and growth leaders. We discuss business topics with experts and give you strategies to help your business thrive. We really want to welcome our special guest this week, Maury Hannigan, CEO at SparkStart, and she is also an expert on recruitment strategy. Welcome.
Great. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Absolutely. Do you want to share a little bit about who you are? And then I could tell Deb's just ready to throw some questions your way.
Always.
Really? Yeah, great. I'm CEO of SparkStart. SparkStart is a recruitment marketing platform. I'm a marketer by training and background. I started my career at Procter & Gamble and then went to Pepsi and did classic consumer packaged goods marketing, and realized that recruiting is essentially marketing. I mean, we've known how to persuade people. We know how to build credibility. We know how to connect with people, or at least marketers have for a long time. And recruiting, not so much. They're still trying to persuade people to join organizations using written job descriptions with paragraphs of text and bullet points, and not the most persuasive content out there. So what we've done with SparkStart is make it easy to add video to that, and really engage candidates. So that's what I do for a living, and I love it.
And of course, it's something near and dear to our hearts as well, just being able to formulate true marketing messages, just not putting a lot of unnecessary fluff and stuff out there, for lack of a more technical term at the moment. And I loved the topic that we kind of picked for today, preparing for the F word, which is hiring freeze. And I think that that's something that is probably weighing on a lot of people's minds right now with the uncertainty as to what's happening with our economy. And a lot of business leaders are in this wait and see mode. And there's not a lot of talk out there that there's going to be massive hiring freezes or anything like that. At least I'm not hearing rumblings through the press or anything like that, but I think that it's kind of unspoken at the moment. Mm-hmm. So the first question is, what do you think? Are we going to have some widespread hiring freezes?
It's hard to say. There's so much uncertainty in the market. Will tariffs happen? What will they mean? What will that do for business? Although you tend to find that when there's uncertainty, businesses pull back. They're hesitant to invest. So even if the economy stays on track, that doesn't mean we won't see it in the market. I was at a conference just 2 weeks ago, and twice in 24 hours, I heard people talk about having a hiring freeze. And it was the first time I'd heard that. And those words, I go, yeah, it's one thing to have a slowdown. It's one thing to put a hold on a couple positions. And we're hearing a lot of that. We're hearing people who are being asked to cut back on their budgets. We're hearing people that are being told, budgets are at least frozen, if not rolling back a little. So will it go all the way to widespread hiring freezes? Unclear. But I think we're in for a softening of the market at the very least. And I hope it's not worse than that, but it's anybody's guess right now.
We always think about what should you do? How should a business prepare for things? And I think it sounds like no matter what, a company should have some options prepared, like A, B, and C, depending on what's happening with the economy. There's all kinds of things that happen that change things. So, what do you think we should be doing now to prepare for, I don't know if worst case, but just these types of scenarios? Any thoughts you have or recommendations for businesses?
Yeah, and I particularly look at the hiring side of things. If there's a slowdown, what you need to do to prepare your existing workforce. If you are going to do a reduction in force, what do you need to be doing now about thinking about roles and so forth? There's a whole lot of things that I'm hopeful that the heads of of HR are thinking about right now. But my lens and my focus is generally on the hiring piece. And the thing that I think is most important is I see a lot of organizations that are working really hard to build their employer brand, to build their presence in the marketplace, to build their reputation as an employer of choice. There are lots of phrases to do it, lots of different ways to go about it. But what happens when hiring slows down or hiring stops is it feels like all of those efforts just stop. They just, the budgets get cut, the personnel that run them get cut, it all goes away, and then we come out of it 18 months later or 24 months later, and you're starting from scratch all over again. And all of that awareness that you built and so forth is just
Right.
lost. And it's such an awful drain of that investment. So I think one of the things anyone who's in the talent acquisition side of the business, the thing they need to be thinking about right now is how do you maintain that presence in the marketplace? And it's different than advertising jobs. I'm not talking about advertising jobs because if you slow down, you're going to stop doing that. But how do you keep in people's minds, gee, if there were an opportunity there that was a match for my credentials, boy, I'd love to work there. That's the piece that you want to keep out there. We've seen the best way to do it is with employee advocacy programs, of having employees willing to share content about the organization. And again, that's different than sharing job posts. I'm not talking about referrals right now, but I've got lots of examples of companies that have done this well. But you can do that without a budget. You need to have those programs set up now. You can't wait until everybody's laid off and then expect someone to create such a program. But if you've got a program and you think through it, it's a great way to keep your visibility out there and keep your reputation strong, so that when we do come out the other side, everybody goes, okay, gee, we didn't hire for 18 months. Now we got to really, heavy up and hire like crazy. You're not at ground zero anymore. So I'm a big fan of employee advocacy programs.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like you can sort of tie that in. And I was going to ask you about budget, which you just said that. Sounds like that will help you tie into retention and all these other things that might happen during the same time. Um, Employee advocacy, and you start building that. So, uh,
Whether we go through a
mhm,
slowdown or not, I mean, employee advocacy
yeah.
always makes sense because at its heart, what a well-run program will do is have a certain number of employees who agree to share on their personal social. They'll provide them with content that's appropriate, that's on brand, that's, if it needs to be through legal, it's been through legal. And then they'll ask those people for a commitment for a certain period of time. Everyone's going to, you want to keep refreshing the program with new people and so forth, and people need to know what's expected of them. And then you want to measure the results of what they're doing. So you've got the results to really look at your earned media value. Earned media value is as simple as taking all the impressions and engagements that you've gotten out there and look at what it would have cost you if you'd paid for that as sponsored media. So if you have 10 employees that share on their personal LinkedIn account, let's say, and they generate, I'll pick a random number, 10,000 impressions, what would it have cost you to have bought 10,000 impressions against that target audience? That's your earned media value. And those things are really valuable no matter what happens to the economy. If you're running any kind of employer brand or recruitment marketing, it's the most efficient thing you can do. It doesn't cost you anything. And you can generate all of the visibility that you really want. So I'm a big proponent of it no matter what happens to the economy.
Yeah, I would agree that, it's kind of crazy when you've been in recruitment marketing, like as long as I have, when they do pull back on the employer branding piece of it. I often think, well, you're not stopping the marketing of your product or your service as a company. Why are you stopping the outreach from the talent perspective? It never made any sense to me at all. And I think that this is a good time to really be talking through about employee advocacy. With everything going on today, and just that whole idea that perhaps those brand dollars will be shut down, or frozen, if there is a reduction in hiring needs or whatever. employee advocacy is always one of those areas that I'm a strong supporter of because it can just work in the background for you, 24/7. So I guess the question is, if you're starting an employee advocacy program, there are going to be a few brand ambassadors that just love working there. They're going to raise their hands and say, "Oh, I'll help out in any way I can." But how do you create more of that groundswell so you've got a lot of content that you can work with?
Right. Well, lot, those are about 6 questions. I want to answer them all. But let me go back to your earlier point about when companies, do go through tough times, they don't stop advertising their brands, but they do stop advertising their employer brand. And I think a lot of that is because companies don't differentiate between advertising jobs and advertising the value of the company as an employer. And particularly if you're going through layoffs, of course you don't want to be advertising jobs. You're letting some people go, even if you do need different skill sets and replacement hiring or whatever, it just seems inappropriate. So I understand why you shut down the job advertising, but that's different than your employer brand presence. And those two things need to be separate. So the same way you're going to keep your whatever your product brand is strong, you want to keep your employer brand strong. But going back to your question about how do you get started, how do you get people? One of the big mistakes we see when people start these programs is they go out and they say, who would like to be part of this? And all your most enthusiastic people are going to stick up their hand, or the ones that are most comfortable on social media, and say, oh, I'd love to do this. And they run the program for a while, particularly if it's not well defined. And people just kind of burn out and they fall off, and all of a sudden, or they don't have enough content to provide them. And a lot of these programs just kind of fizzle out. So one of the things, the Sparkstart platform can be used to manage employee advocacy programs. You can put all of your content in one place and make it easy for people to grab and share to social. So we do a lot of advisory around it, just informally, to help clients get started. One of the things we recommend is that you start with a fairly small number of people that you handpick, and this can be 6 people to get it started, 12 people. Probably never more than 20. 20 is a lot to manage. Start with a small number and ask them for a specific time period. Would you be willing to be a brand ambassador for 6 months? Right? This isn't the rest of your life or the rest of your employment. You don't have to do this forever. But for 6 months, would you be willing to do this? And set up the expectations. What we'd like you to do is share something every other week, twice a month. Is that reasonable? Maybe you want more, maybe you want less. There's no one right answer, but there needs to be an answer. You need to manage expectations of what you're asking people and then hold them to it. And when they do that, you want to measure what they're doing. And at the end of their 6 months, ask them to nominate a person to replace them. Because there's nothing more flattering than being nominated for somebody, right? If someone says, hey, Deb, we think you're really popular. We think you've got a great social presence. I think you should be taking over my slot here. It's hard to go, no, I don't want to do that. You realize you're flattered because you've been asked. There's precedent there. There's a lot of momentum going on. That's a great way to do it. So if you keep your numbers small, you find you can rotate through. You can find people who do have social media presences. The other reason you want to do that is that every employee is connected to a different group of people. But oftentimes, we're all connected to people that we either went to school with, or we worked other places with, or we know professionally. From an employer standpoint, your employees are connected to your target audience, right? You put something on my personal LinkedIn account, it goes to basically every TA person in the business. I'm connected to 9,000 people in talent acquisition because I meet people at conferences. We all have our networks in our area of expertise. And that's true whether you're doing retail, whether you're doing software development, whether you're doing legal. It doesn't matter. MDs, nurses have worked at other hospitals with other nurses. They went to school with other nurses. They're all connected really well. So the more you can move through your employee groups, the more of those potential employees you can get your content in front of. So it's a really effective way to hit your target audience, more effective than you can really even with paid targeting.
So I have a follow-up to that then. because in every organization, you've got your extroverts and your introverts, so how do you get participation from some of those really key players in the business that are more introverted?
Okay. Well, one of the things with an employee advocacy program, there are some programs where the employees are asked to generate the content themselves. So they're asked to please make a video every other week and put it on TikTok and, talk about training and development, or talk about sustainability, or talk about whatever. That's one way to do it. An easier way to do it, and in truth, a safer way to do it, so you've got control over the content and you're sure that you're comfortable with everything that's going out there, is to provide them with the content, so that every other week you've got a video for them to share, or you've got something for them to share, information about your sustainability, something that, it's got to be something that they feel good about. If it's overproduced and it feels like corporate propaganda, they're not going to be comfortable putting that out. But if it's an employee story from one of their colleagues, or if it's from a department head who just talks about the investment you're making in new product development or new markets you're going into, or if it's, we've even seen some wonderful stuff, somebody in finance just talking about the great quarter we just had. All of those things can be positive messages. So you're not dependent on your extroverts to create the content necessarily. You just want people who are well connected. They may or may not be extroverts. They may just have great connections and stay in touch with people. So to the extent that you can provide the content and make it easily available to them, let them share it in a single click and put it on their social medias, that's the best way. You also have I hate to make it sound like a control freak, but there's a reality for a lot of organizations. You want to make sure that people have the messaging right. Sometimes some people's sense of humor isn't everybody's sense of humor. You don't want to see a joke that went wrong or just was out of context or something. You want to make sure this is all positive messages out there and authentic ones, right? You don't want to be making this stuff up. You don't want people feeling pressured. Oh, I got to make a video again today. I'll say something, anything. And if they don't really believe it, it's going to come through. You want this credible and authentic. So we're big believers in employee generated content, but go to people and say, talk about, if you company, what was that like? You now have 2 years of expertise. You started off here and now you're here. Can you just make a quick video about that? And if someone does it and you don't get hung up on making it perfect, none of us speak in completely perfect sentences. And oh, they tripped up there. They forgot a word there. Oh, we can't use that. Yes, you can. It's the way we're all talking right now, right? I'm sure if you diagrammed all our sentences, mine in particular would be a disaster. But it's authentic, it's real, it's the way normal people speak. And if you let people speak, then you've got content someone wants to share because they feel good about it. They're not sharing propaganda, they're sharing a story from a colleague. And it's easy to share a story from a colleague. It's not easy to share something that your friends and acquaintances are going to be bored with and roll their eyes with and turn off immediately.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, especially we've been talking a lot with the world of AI and a lot of automation. Like authenticity is the thing that just rises to the top. So I'm glad you pointed that out. So you've given us some tips on how to make sure these programs succeed. Quite a few actually, but if you have any more thoughts on how to ensure that something that when you start these programs they don't fail, and I'd also be curious about what are your experiences with sort of the leadership's approach, this top down, this is who we are, this is important to us. Have you seen where that has worked, and when they're not involved it doesn't? Or I'd love any thoughts you had on that.
Okay, let me start with your first question about how do you prevent a program from failing and fizzling out? I think the biggest thing is to make sure that your advocates get rewarded somehow. That doesn't necessarily mean money. It might be an Uber Eats coupon. Hey, thanks. You got 500 impressions this week. Here's lunch on us. You'd be amazed sometimes what a $10 or $20 gift card can do. It's just a recognition. Or if you have an organization, we've got clients who just say, no, people are paid to do their job, and this is part of it. If they volunteer, they volunteer. They don't get paid for it. that's I'm not going to fight that corporate culture. That's fine. If that's your culture, great. But at a minimum, at the end of their 6 months, or as you come around to review time for personnel reviews, absolutely an email needs to go out to each of their supervisors that says, please note, Amanda, participated in this. She generated $40,000 worth of earned media value for the organization. She was a positive voice. This was a real contribution to the company. Please make sure it gets noted and recognized in her review. At a minimum, it's an email. No one has any constraints against being able to send a favorable endorsement email. But some people, you send them T-shirts. We've seen companies that give them points towards their company store. There are lots of ways you can do it. It doesn't have to be monetary. It can be just recognition. But do that at a very minimum. Have people feel good about it. Have people glad that they did it, glad, any positive reinforcement is always positive. But then the other piece is to actually measure the success of this program so you got the management support to keep it going.
Right.
If you're using a platform to manage it, and platforms aren't expensive, but they are an expense. So, and make sure they've got the visibility. Whenever you can give positive visibility to it, best way to keep momentum going and keeping it going. But back to your second question about the top down, what values are here.
Right.
As long as they're authentic, I love them. As CEOs of a company, I think I really do have a real handle on our values as an organization, because all the decisions ultimately I have the right to veto. And if they're not in line with our values and our culture, they don't happen. When you get very large organizations and you can get management that gets pretty disconnected from what happens on the day-to-day in individual plants and individual offices and so forth, or organizations that are aspirational. Is that a polite way of saying disconnected from reality? They want to believe that they're in bed, they're actually living certain values and they're not really. I think that's going to sabotage your employee advocacy program if you try to pretend you're something you're not. The other thing about the top-down piece, we see a lot of organizations that spend a lot of resources pulling together their employee value proposition, right, or whatever version of it they call. And if you've got a large organization, I'm not a big believer that big organizations have a culture. I think there are a lot of microcultures that happen. I think your internal audit group probably has a different culture than your sales group. I think your sales group probably has a different culture than your warehouse group. Hopefully your values are consistent, but what that day-to-day is like, how communication happens, those things vary from country to country, from part of this country, other parts, from different locations and so forth. So I think I see organizations that they have their 3 pillars they want to communicate in everything they do. And that can be force fit. Oftentimes they do translate to something local, and that's terrific when that happens. But it's something that I think you need the flexibility to recognize that you do have microcultures within your organization. And as long as people are sharing things that they believe are true, it's going to resonate. It's going to get more, you're going to get more cooperation out of your employees. They're going to be willing to share it more often on more of their social platforms. They're going to be willing to endorse it. The closer you stay to something that they believe and they're proud of, the better you are. So I still, completely respect senior management wanting to say, these are our values, these are the things that we do, and an entire organization sticking to that.
Yeah.
You hope that happens. But just because someone's pontificated 3 values doesn't mean that that's really what's going to work for you.
Right.
You need to find out the positive values you do embrace and you do practice every day, and that's going to give you your mileage.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah, being able to translate those values into the stories that we live as employees on a daily basis, right? Even as CEOs, we're still the employees of our company as well, right? So I think that there's a lot of good, meaty stuff in what you just said. From an ROI perspective, I think everybody wants to know, is it really worth it? And so I'd love to hear what some of your clients have experienced, or what you see differentiates those that have employee advocacy programs versus those that do not.
Oh, the benefit spreads so far beyond just the recruiting piece, because if you end up with more employee referrals, which can be a great thing. Also, when employees are advocates, you find it helps engagement. If you give people stories they feel good about, and you surface those and you create that content, it helps them feel good about their job, so it helps retention. The other thing is they're also sharing with people who are potential customers. It becomes just visibility for your brand as a company. So the ROI spreads across. It's one thing for you to put out your commercials for your products and your services and so forth, and everyone understands that those are professionally produced, they're scripted, they are very controlled. But when someone hears an employee say, I work here and here's what my day is like, or here's how we treat customers, or here's the dedication we really have to quality control, or here's how I'm keeping my skills, absolutely up to speed so that I can contribute back and deliver better product, service, whatever. Those things are immeasurable in terms of the impact that they have on your potential customers. So I wouldn't underestimate that at all. Harder to measure often. Can you go and say, oh, our sales were up 25% because of our employee advocacy program? It can be hard to track that all the way through the decision and the purchase decision of someone. But it's real. I think we all know that it's real, that any positive thing you can get out there and give real credibility to why your products or services are desirable and should be purchased. And a lot of that comes back to your employees and how they're doing their jobs and what they're committed to and what you're providing to them, the employees, as a company. So it's really much, much broader than just talent attraction. It tends to be funded by TA, but the benefits are massive.
Yeah, and you made me think, I would say make sure that chunk of like stats you were mentioning earlier, whether it was engagement or reach or whatever, make sure that marketing is including that in the overall, reports of activity. And you might have to insert yourself into that conversation, but that makes a lot of sense to just, make sure it's represented, right? Not siloed
Yes.
out. So
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Management loves numbers.
Mhm.
And it's something that talent acquisition hasn't been great at, except for, days to fill, which is a dreadful, dreadful stat. So, but these are real success metrics,
Yeah.
right? These are really solid success metrics. So absolutely you want to be tracking these and have them available and make sure they get visibility. One of the things that I recommend when someone starts a employee advocacy program, that when they start it, they get commitment from a CHRO. Will these numbers be shared at the highest levels?
Yeah.
Will they get the visibility? Will people know? And it needs to go to the business owners as well, or the business heads as well, so that they understand why their people are participating, that this really is contributing to the company as a whole. This is an awesome HR thing they're doing because it feels good or it looks nice, kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is a business, absolutely a business effort.
That's awesome. That's a good sort of exclamation point to this whole episode, I think. So very nice. Well, good. Anything else, Deb? Did we cover your questions?
We did, but I of course can always think of more if we have more time. But I think we're knocking up on the end of the time. Maury, thank you so much for being our guest today and talking about a subject that we all have passion for. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'd love to talk to you anytime. I always enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.
Oh, we appreciate it. Christina, any final words from you?
No, I just really liked the making sure that things are the data, the information, the success is shared across the board, so that you get your kudos and it's really supported across the whole company. So I like that. So thank you. So thank you to our audience. We hope you found today's episode helpful. Thanks so much to Mari for joining us and giving us a lot of insight and some real actionable items. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Spotify, and you won't miss an update from Ready Set Action. So until next time.